So basically, I came up with some questions, more of a guideline rather than sticking to it. So,
Okay.
just want to keep it relaxed and, just want
Place to start.
yeah, just a place to start. Um, I'd like to start by, asking or having you state your name and your current occupation.
Name is Pamela Deans, and I am Regulatory Manager at Auxilium Pharmaceuticals in Malvern, Pennsylvania. I've been there 2 years. I retired in 2003 after 30 years of working for Merck Research Labs in Bluebell, Pennsylvania. When I retired, they've now moved back to West Point, Pennsylvania, the regulatory group. I graduated, as I was talking to you earlier, from Rutgers with a degree in history, BA in history, and I am doing what I really wanted to do was to go into law school, but I ended up in a career. Food and drug law is my specialty, and I deal daily with the FDA, the EMA, which is the European Medicine Association, and with Health Canada, with the 3 agencies, and my job is to get the drugs from the investigational phase through to marketing.
So like clinical trials?
I take all that clinical trial information and all of the non-clinical, which is the animal data, the chemistry for the drug, and put all the manufacturing, put it all together into an application to file to the different countries.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So keeps me busy. Keeps me. At nighttime I can be on the phone at night at 7 with Japan, and in the morning with England at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I'm tired. Sometimes because I've been doing meetings at 7 at night and at 4 in the morning. So because I'm worldwide.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Yeah. Could you tell us the names of your parents and their occupation?
My dad's George Deans Sr., and my mother's Helen. Her maiden name is Knight Deans. And my mother was a stay-at-home mom. There are 8 of us children. My dad is a baker, and he was the first entrepreneur on the main line to open his own business. He opened the bakery in Wayne, and that's where he baked from, and he branched out and had 2 other stores, one in Malvern and one in Bryn Mawr. Then he did go bankrupt in 65, I guess, when 1965, when he went bankrupt, and then he closed those 3 businesses and restarted a business 6 years later in Philadelphia, and he was there until he died in 1989. He had the Deans Bakery, Deans Haverford Pastries, and it's a legacy. Most of the kids here are my age. Everybody grew up in the bakery with us. My dad, if you were at his house, you went to work. So there was no sitting home. You had to work.
So a lot of experience from a young age?
I put it this way. It was the experience of knowing that you had to earn it, that nothing was going to be given to you. And that was important because in the 60s, you had that whole push it was benign neglect, and I mean that was a term that really was going on at the time with the black community, where because of the racism you were kind of you were ignored, and your needs were ignored. Just to give you an example, I was at Conestoga High School, and I asked the guidance department in 1965. I said, here are my applications for college, and they said to me, why are you applying to white schools? And I said, because I qualify. And they said, well, if you get in, how are you going to pay for it? And I did get into, I decided on Penn State, and but there was that whole thing about, you're black and you shouldn't be doing this. You shouldn't be going to college. When I got to Penn State at Ogons, back in those days, they gave you an aptitude test to say where you should be. And they told me, freshman test for you, before you started, they said, oh, you should be in medicine. And I said, but I hate science. And I said, I want to go into law school. And they said, yeah, but you should really be into medicine. It's ironic that I ended up in medicine practicing law, basically, without a degree on either, but being an expert. Here I am 35 years later, an expert. But at Penn State even, at Ogons, they said to me before classes even started, they said, you know that black people fail at Penn State. You're not going to make it at Penn State. At the end of the first semester, I was on the dean's list, and they wanted to know how did I do that. And I said, well, did you see the high school I came from? I came from one of the best high schools, in the country. And I was an A student there, and I did exceptionally well on my SATs. Why would you think that I wouldn't do well? Well, because the inner city kids who came out from the city were so far behind, they were not prepared at all, and that was a result of their school system. That they really were academically.
So they were just making a
They were just filling
generalization?
right. They were making well, it wasn't really. I mean, there was some validity to it because the students weren't prepared, but they weren't prepared because there was that whole thing in the 60s, and then when affirmative action came in, and it's like, okay, we got to fill the quotas, and they weren't really looking at qualifications.
Right.
So what happened as a result of that, I ended up after my first semester having 20 black students from inner city Philadelphia that I was tutoring to get them through their first year. And it was successful to do a mentoring program. That was successful to do that. But there was always that underlying tone of they were always setting you up for failure.
Right.
And expecting failure. Very, very different climate when it came to academics and to excelling. If you were not an athlete, or an entertainer, you weren't expected to do anything. And to be a female, you were only expected to have children. You were not expected to want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, anything that required a brain.
So it sounds like to me, with the immense pressures that you had to endure, did that make like a source of motivation for you, or resentment, or?
Actually, it wasn't. For me, it was not resentment, or in the sense that you can't tell me. I already know that I'm great.
Yeah.
It's your problem if you don't know that I'm great.
Yeah.
That's your perception.
Yeah.
And so it didn't bother me in that respect. However, I was very much aware of the other people around me here in Mount Pleasant. The other kids, when it came time to, everybody got their report cards, and everybody would laugh at me because I was today's terms, I was the geek. I was always home reading a book. They were out having fun. I was at home reading a book. And I'm still that way today. I don't. That has not changed, that personality. And so I was laughed at, and okay, but today it's I don't think that the kids have that kind of cultural bias. From my own father, I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and my dad, he said, and this is this is my sister and I, we were both very bright. My youngest sister, Penny, and I were extremely bright and did very well and excelled. And my father would say, and we were also very good not only academically, but in sports and other things. Well, my dad would say, 5 boys and I get these letters from a girl. From the girls, right?
Yeah. Well, that's impressive.
Yeah. But he still never changed all those years. He never changed when my oldest daughter came along, and she was valedictorian at her high school, and she went on to Harvard. And my dad was like, I still don't get it, why I got this from a girl. Because he thought he was of that generation where women were only wives and raised children, and that's all.
Cultural thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
It was a cultural thing. He didn't understand, that life was changing, and that women were no longer just staying at home.
Right.
And that's across not just, minority women. That's when white women entered the workforce too and started to achieve, and they were no longer staying at home. So it was a shift. Also, too, when I was a teenager, I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I did go to the marches and participate, and the biggest event was the March on Washington that I attended with my dad and his older brother. The three of us went and attended that, and that was awesome.
Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, the 1964 march. Yeah.
With Martin Luther King.
With Martin Luther King. Yeah.
I have to
That
ask.
was awesome.
Did you see him speak at the memorial?
Yes, it was awesome.
Wow.
But I had seen him speak a year before. He was here at Villanova, in the what do you call it? It's not the auditorium.
The pavilion?
Yeah, he was not the pavilion.
Well, they changed the name because the guy went insane.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, yeah, exactly. DuPont went insane.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So at any rate, he was there, and it was the stadium, and it was crowded. It was packed. And I looked around that stadium as a 14-year-old at the time, and I said, oh my God, here we are on the main line, and I can look and I can count the blacks that are attending. But the one thing that stuck with me with Martin Luther King during his speech that night was that someone asked the question, why does he speak the way he was speaking so eloquently at Villanova? And then when he's with blacks, he speaks differently, and he said, I have to speak a language that they understand, otherwise I'm not communicating. So his speeches would be to the audience always that he was approaching. And that I'm always reminded of that when I go out and I do any kind of speaking for the pharmaceutical companies. It's a different Pam that speaks than if I go out here on the street. And if I pick up the phone, I'm at work and I speak to my sister or my brother, it's very different.
Sure. Yeah.
But you have to be, and
Right.
so that's the one thing about being a black person is, you have a professional, and then you have your personal, and they're two very different worlds.
Right.
I would come home as a teenager, come home to Mount Pleasant, and there would be no one here except for Miss Maisie Hall, who was here to motivate me and to talk to me about, being the best that you can be. I didn't have that culturally from the community, because here it's like a lethargy. Everybody had their own, the families each have defined social status in Mount Pleasant.
Does that creates like a divide between people, you're saying?
It does. It does and it doesn't, because if you're one of the Byrds, then your grandfather made all this money, and therefore you don't have to achieve, and they don't. It was because so much was given to them,
Right.
and they didn't feel the need to achieve. Then you have my family, the Deans, who were very, very entrepreneurial, and they were that way because, I don't know if you know the history of how Mount Pleasant came to be.
We know very we
basics.
know the basics, I guess, rough outline of it.
Well,
In the 40s.
Yeah. When they came up from the south, each family. I don't know if all the families this is true, but for the Deans family, they were sharecroppers, and from Murfreesboro, North Carolina, and they left the farm, and they were not allowed to leave the farm. There were 13 of them, and my aunt, my dad's older sister, Gertrude, she went south. She came here first, and she got a job at RCA, and she bought the house here on Henry Avenue for her parents and her siblings. And she rented a tractor trailer, and went down to North Carolina, and she brought her family. Her father and her brothers they were hidden beneath the furniture because they were not allowed to leave the land. The paddy waggers would have brought them back. And because the men were not allowed, the women could leave the land, but the men could not. So it was an escape. And when you hear them tell the story of how they escaped from Murfreesboro, that generation, And they got here, and the deal was when they got here, they were attached to a wealthy family and a Quaker family, and what they would do is my dad and his 6 brothers, each one was sent off to trade school. All the boys were. So each one had a trade and was able to take care of themselves and their families, to give them that start. That's what set the Deans apart, because they were educated and attached to a family that was geared to education. And my aunts, they all went off. They went to college, or if they didn't go to college, they went into some area where they excelled, each one in their lives. And and the brothers all excelled too. So, I grew up that's the other thing. I didn't grow up prejudiced, because we were too close to the white community to be prejudiced. Yet we could feel the racism. It was felt. It was obvious here on the main line. You knew, as a teenager growing up, I knew where I could go, where I couldn't go. There were no signs here in the North, but you knew, okay, I can't go to Paoli Diner. You won't be welcome there. And you just grow up knowing it's a way of life. It's a way of life, and you know what it is, and it's like, okay. So looking back, you say today, we've come a long way, and it is a lot better. However, my lament is educationally, because I see another insidious thing that has happened to the black community, and it crept in as a result of the Vietnam War and the black soldiers coming back addicted to drugs. And that was by design. You'll never get anybody to admit that's what they did, but it was to make sure that here you've got these blacks who are now trained killers. You don't want them coming back and become violent in the streets of America. So you make drug addicts out of them, and they'll be pacified. And it was necessary to do that. They did not want, during the whole civil rights movement, they didn't want that violent group out there able to affect the violence. However, that's what we have today in the inner city. You've got black on black crime that was unheard of before. You wouldn't find a black who would kill another black prior to the 1960s. That wouldn't happen.
All a result of the Vietnam War?
The Korean War, the Vietnam War, and all of it. And Pam's opinion, one person's opinion, I just think that integration, or even how well it also introduced us as a community, to a lot of bad habits, that we would not have been exposed to when we were kept isolated. But once you become integrated, and that happened, then everything opened up.
So do you view integration and diversity, obviously from what you just described, it has some negative traits?
Had some negative.
Is there any positive things that you see come out of that?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, because now nobody's limited. When I came out of high school, it was with all these limitations and barriers. You're only limited by self now.
Right.
And the choices, the lifestyle choices that you make, that is what limits you, not your race. And that to me is the biggest plus.
Yeah.
Because before it didn't matter. It was supposed to be, to me, it was supposed to be a compliment when I worked with the MDs and PhDs who would tell me, I always forget that you're black. Well, what does that mean? To say, I forget you're black? Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, what does that have to do with anything? But, today you don't get those kind of comments. You're just treated as a colleague. So I see that growth. And that had to happen in America.
It's unimaginable.
What it was like?
It's what it was like hearing this,
Yeah.
today, I can't even imagine somebody saying that.
No, right, exactly, because, and I have to remind my children, that the civil rights movement and all that, it's history to you, but it is what I lived through.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not history to me. It's seeing the progression and being able to look back and say it's better. And it's even not just a black and white issue. I talk to my young women who work with me and for me and who report to me. I said, don't complain to me about daycare. There were no daycares when I had my children.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have daycares. And I said, and you didn't have a right to your own credit, because you were married, everything was in your husband's name, nothing was in your name, and you could buy nothing, you couldn't do anything without your husband, or if you were not married, your father.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was male dominated.
Right.
Prior to the Civil Rights Act in 1964, everything was male dominated.
Right.
So, we've come a very long way with civil rights for everybody. So I get very upset when people say, they want to, repeal the equal, affirmative action, equal employment opportunity, because without that, those doors would not have been opened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to say that we don't know if you close that door and you don't make people if you don't make them responsible by law, will they go back to pre-1964 attitudes?
Right.
And only hire, oh no, I'm not hiring a black person, and be able to do that. I'm not hiring a woman because she'll get pregnant.
Right.
That kind of thing. I don't want to see those days come back.
Yeah, it's very primitive.
Very, very primitive. And, and when we're going back to Mount Pleasant, I see the transition going on now, and there's a lot of resistance, from what I've been told, to the influx of whites moving back to Mount Pleasant. And I say back because Henry Avenue was basically pretty much white when I was growing up, until maybe I was about 10 or 11 when the whites started to move out, and it became all black. But if you get anybody who tells you it was all black, they weren't here, or they have very short memories, of when this was an integrated community.
Right.
So it's not something that's new.
Right.
And I don't know how to get it across to those who are militantly right now, and militant against the college students who are here. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why?
So you think there's a lot of animosity?
A lot of animosity, and it comes from perceptions. And perception, I know, they perceive that, okay, they're here, and they meaning the whites are here, and they're not part of us, and and for me, that's a horrible way to think. Mm-hmm. Because we were not a part of them either, at one time, so why would you take on those attributes that we fought hard to move away from?
Right.
Yeah, I would never, when I was at Penn State, blacks would all congregate from the city, they'd all sit at lunch at one table. And I'm not sitting there. I'm walking around socializing with everybody. They said, well, why aren't you sitting with us? Because the whole point is for us to get to know each other.
Right.
You can't change anybody if you don't know them. Mm-hmm. And you need to get to know one another instead of everybody, the Asians are here, blacks are here, Italians over there. I didn't know anybody Jewish. There were no Jewish kids when I went from around here on the main line. There weren't Jewish people. So the first contact I had with Jewish was when I went to Penn State. And I couldn't understand what's all this hatred against these people? They're just people.
Right. So you've seen in recent times a regression back into
those attitudes,
schools of thought and attitudes.
Yeah, and it does bother me because, and I tell you, too many people died for your right to be integrated, for your right to be different. And to be accepted. Too many people died for that. And what did we march for? Why did people die? It wasn't in vain. It was because the country had to change, and the attitudes had to change. Now we have the influx of. That's why I get upset when they say the Hispanics, the Mexicans, and no, you don't be labeling these people. They are human beings, and they're going to be integrated into this culture. And you don't do that by separating. You pull together and find each other's strengths. That's why I think Michael Creary's doing a great job with, starting with the garden and in trying to become, integrate the communities. Because that fence was there, with the townhouses. That fence was there, so it was always separated. I'm glad he wanted to tear down that fence and that wall separating the two communities. Because it really needed to happen. Like I said, you've got people here, who resent it and who will say, well, you don't live here anymore, Pam. No, I don't live here anymore. However, this is my first love. And I still see Mount Pleasant as a great place to have grown up and a place to raise my children. If there was space, but couldn't stay here with getting married and moving on. But you don't have communities like this anymore. You don't have that kind of solidarity. We grew up, as Kevin is not biologically related to me, Kevin Stroman, but he's a brother to me, a little brother. His parents and my parents were very close, and as are all the families here in Mount Pleasant. The core group of families are all very close. And what happens to one happens to all. I mean, that was bred into us, and we were taught, you don't leave anybody behind if there's a threat. Give you an example. There were times when other communities came in to fight Mount Pleasant. This used to be a bar here. I'm sure you know that the house on the corner was the Plantation Inn, and there used to be fights there. Well, the community one time, it was Norristown was coming through to fight and start a fight. Well, not only the teenage young 20-somethings were out there to defend the community, the adult males came out also and said, "You will not."
And so you're saying outsiders from communities that are further away?
That were further away, like Norristown.
How far is that?
Norristown's about 8 miles away.
Okay.
About 8 miles away. And Ardmore, and I mean, in the 60s there were gang type in these communities where.
So it sounds very territorial.
It was very territorial, and no, you weren't going to come to Mount Pleasant and tear it up, because it wasn't going to happen. The adults would be out there on, also. And even to the point where the police, for different township police, were protective of the community. And to give you an example, now, of course, Tredyffrin runs from here to Paoli. And there was a threat from what was back then was the Warlocks. And they were a motorcycle gang.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
And they were very, very racist. They were coming out of Reading, and they were going to fire up. They were going to burn Paoli, from Paoli down here to Mount Pleasant. Well,
what year is this in?
This was about 1963. Was when the Warlocks came through? I can't remember when it was. What year it was?
It was in the late 60s.
Yeah, it was the 60s. But at any rate, what happened?
You ain't got to take me.
What happened? What happened was interesting, because